In the ancient land of China, before the great emperors built their towering walls and golden palaces, before the rivers had names and the mountains had roads, there was a world that belonged not to men, but to dragons. Massive creatures of impossible power and ancient wisdom, their scales shimmering like 10,000 precious stones in the sunlight, their wings casting shadows over entire valleys when they flew. The people of this ancient land did not fear the dragons. They revered them. They built temples in their honor. They offered gifts at the edges of rivers and mountaintops where the dragons were known to rest. Because the people understood something that the modern world has forgotten. The dragons were not monsters. They were guardians, ancient protectors of the land and sky and sea. And as long as the dragons and the people lived in harmony, the world remained in balance. But all harmony must eventually be tested. And this is the story of the day that balance was broken, and the one person brave enough to restore it. This is the legend of Mei Lin and the last dragon of China. Her name was Mei Lin, and she was not a warrior. She was not a princess. She was not chosen by prophecy or blessed by the gods. She was the daughter of a simple rice farmer in a small village nestled between two great mountains in the heart of ancient China. She was 17 years old with quick dark eyes and hands calloused from years of working in the fields beside her father. Her village was poor but happy. The people worked hard and laughed often and gathered together every evening to share food and stories around the fire. And every night before she slept, Mei Lin would climb to the top of the hill above her village and look up at the vast dark sky and watch for the dragons. Because on clear nights, if you knew where to look, you could see them. Enormous dark shapes moving gracefully across the face of the moon. Ancient and magnificent and free. And Mei Lin had loved them her entire life. Her father always said that Mei Lin was born under a dragon star. That the night she came into the world, a great dragon had flown directly overhead, and its light had fallen on the newborn child. He said it like it was a blessing. He had no idea it was a prophecy. The oldest dragon in all of China was called Shenlong. He was so ancient that the oldest grandmothers in the oldest villages could not remember a time before him. His scales were the deepest blue of the midnight sky, and his eyes were the bright gold of the harvest moon. He was the guardian of the great river that flowed through the heart of the land, the river that gave life to every village and farm and city for 1,000 miles in every direction. As long as Shenlong watched over the river, the water ran clean and clear and strong. The rains came when they were needed. The floods stayed within their banks. The fish were plentiful. The crops grew tall. Shenlong was not just a dragon. He was the heartbeat of the land itself. And he had kept that heartbeat steady and strong for 10,000 years. But even the most ancient and powerful creatures in the world can be wounded. And 10,000 years of guarding the world is a very long time to make enemies. In the mountains to the north, something ancient and terrible was waking up. Deep inside the Black Peaks, where no village had ever been built and no road had ever been cut, where the snow never melted and the wind never stopped howling, there lived a dragon unlike any other. His name was Huayan, the Fire Fury. Where Shenlong was ancient and wise and gentle, Huayan was ancient and bitter and full of rage. His scales were the deep red of burning coals, and his eyes were the white-hot center of a flame. He had been sleeping in the Black Mountains for 3,000 years, bound there by an ancient agreement between the dragons and the first emperor of China, an agreement that had kept the land safe for all that time. But agreements made between the living do not always survive the death of those who made them. And the last emperor who knew the terms of that ancient agreement had been dead for 100 years. And so Huiyin had been growing stronger in his sleep, and now he was finally awake. The first sign that something was wrong came to Mei Lin's village on an ordinary morning in early spring. She was working in the rice fields with her father when the water in the paddies began to turn dark. Not the healthy dark of rich soil, but the deep, ominous dark of something poisoned and wrong. The fish in the nearby river began to float to the surface belly up by the thousands. The birds went silent all at once, as if someone had reached into the sky and turned off their song. And then the ground shook, not violently, but steadily, a deep rhythmic trembling like the heartbeat of something enormous waking up far away. Mei Lin stood up straight in the rice paddy and looked toward the northern mountains. And even from this great distance, she could see it. A thin column of smoke rising from the highest dragon. Dark red smoke that caught the morning light and turned the whole northern sky the color of blood. Within 3 days, the news had spread to every village in the land. Hua Yin, the fire fury, had awakened. He had already destroyed 2 villages in the northern mountains, burning them to ash in a single night. The survivors who made it south told stories that made grown men weep with terror. They spoke of a dragon so vast his body blocked out the sun when he flew overhead. They spoke of fire so hot it turned stone to liquid. They spoke of a roar so loud it shattered the ice on mountain lakes and sent avalanches crashing down the slopes. And worst of all, they spoke of what Hua Yin seemed to be looking for, because he was not destroying the villages randomly. He was moving in a specific direction, south, following the path of the Great River, heading directly toward the place where Shen Long made his home. And everyone who heard this news understood what Hua Yin was not simply destroying. He was hunting. He had come to kill the last great guardian dragon. And if Shen Long fell, there would be nothing standing between Hua Yin and the rest of China. The emperor sent his greatest warriors north to face Hua Yin. 10,000 soldiers in gleaming armor, carrying the finest weapons in all of China. They marched north in long, proud columns, their banners flying, their drums beating, the ground shaking beneath their feet. Mei Lin watched them pass through her village from the side of the road. She watched their proud faces and their shining weapons, and she felt something cold settle in her chest, because she had grown up listening to the old stories. She had spent her whole childhood learning about dragons, and she knew something that the emperor and his generals did not know. You cannot fight a dragon with weapons. The fire that burns inside a dragon, like Hua Yin, is not a natural fire. It is ancient fire, the first fire that ever burned in the world. And no sword or spear or shield made by human hands has ever survived contact with the first fire. The 10,000 soldiers marching north were not going to win. They were marching to their deaths, and there was nothing Mei Lin could do to stop them. 3 days after the soldiers marched north, the sky above Mei Lin's village turned red. Not the red of sunset, but the red of fire. Massive and terrible and far too close. And then the sound reached them. A roar so deep and so powerful that it was less a sound than a physical force. A wave of pressure that knocked people off their feet and shattered every clay pot in every house in the village. The emperor's 10,000 soldiers were gone, defeated in a single night. And Hua Yin was closer now, much closer. The village elders called a meeting and decided that everyone must flee south immediately. Pack only what you can carry. Leave everything else. Run. And as the village erupted in a panic, and people began grabbing their children and their most precious belongings and streaming out of the southern gate, Mei Lin stood completely still in the center of the village square. Because in the chaos and the terror and the noise, a voice had spoken to her. Not out loud, not in any human language, but deep inside her chest, in the place where your heartbeat lives, a voice as ancient as the mountains themselves had spoken 3 words. Come to me. Mei Lin told no one. She knew they would not understand. She knew they would think she had lost her mind with fear. So she waited until the village was empty, and then she turned and walked north. Not south like everyone else. North, toward the fire and the smoke and the terrible roar of Hua Yin getting closer with every passing hour. She walked through the empty villages that the other survivors had fled. She walked past abandoned fields and overturned carts and the scattered belongings of thousands of people who had run for their lives. She walked through the night, guided by nothing but the voice inside her chest, pulling her forward like a thread of golden light. And as dawn broke on the second day of her journey, she crested a hill and stopped. Below her, in a vast valley between 2 mountain ranges, lay the Great River. And coiled in the shallows of the river, his magnificent blue scales barely visible above the dark water, was Shen Long, the oldest dragon in all of China, and he was dying. Mei Lin had never been so close to a dragon before. Even wounded and weakened Shen Long was the most magnificent thing she had ever seen in her life. He was enormous. His body filled the entire valley. His scales caught the dawn light and threw it back in 1,000 shades of deep blue and silver and green. But she could see the wounds clearly now. 3 massive tears in his scales along his left side, where Hua Yan's claws had found their mark. Dark blood the color of a midnight river seeping into the water around him. His breathing was labored and slow. His golden eyes were barely open. But when Mei Lin came down the hill and waded into the shallows and put her small calloused hand against his scales, he opened his eyes fully and looked at her. And in that moment, Mei Lin felt the full weight of 10,000 years press against her like a warm wind. He had been waiting for her. He had called her here. He had known she was coming. And now, looking into those ancient golden eyes, Mei Lin understood why. Shenlong could not speak in human language, but he did not need to. Everything he needed to say, he said through those ancient golden eyes and through the warmth that radiated from his scales into Mei Lin's hands and up through her arms and into her heart. She understood all of it in an instant, the way you understand something in a dream. She understood that Shenlong was too badly wounded to face Hua Yan again. She understood that if Hua Yan reached the river and killed Shenlong, the great river would die with him. Without the river, the land would dry and crack and turn to dust. Millions of people would starve. The balance that had held the world together for 10,000 years would shatter completely. She understood all of this, and then she understood the last thing. The thing that made her breath stop in her chest and her hands tremble against the scales. She understood what Shenlong was asking her to do. He was asking her to face Hua Yan in his place. He was asking this 17-year-old rice farmer's daughter to do what 10,000 of the emperor's finest soldiers had failed to do. He was asking her to stop the fire fury. Mei Lin wanted to say no. Every part of her that was human and mortal and afraid wanted to pull her hands away from those ancient scales and run south as fast as her legs could carry her. She was not a warrior. She had no weapons. She had no armor. She had no training. She was a 17-year-old girl who grew up in a rice paddy. What could she possibly do against a dragon that had destroyed 10,000 soldiers in a single night? But then Shenlong did something she did not expect. He lowered his great head until his golden eye was level with her face. And she saw something in that ancient eye that she had never expected to see there. She saw trust, complete and absolute and unconditional trust. This creature who had lived for 10,000 years and seen everything the world had to offer. This ancient guardian who had watched empires rise and fall like waves on a beach, trusted her. Not because she was powerful, not because she was chosen, but because she had come when he called. Because she had walked north when everyone else ran south. Because she was here, and sometimes that is enough. Shenlong breathed on her, a long, slow breath of deep blue light that settled around her like a second skin and sank into her bones and her blood and her heartbeat. She felt it change her, not dramatically, not painfully, but completely, like a key turning in a lock that had always been there waiting. She felt the river beneath her feet as if it were part of her own body. She felt the mountains around her as if they were her own bones. She felt the ancient agreement that bound the world together humming in her chest like a song she had always known but never been able to hear before. And she felt something else, a thread of connection stretching north through the mountains directly to the darkness where Hua Yan was coming. She could feel his rage like a fire in her own chest, ancient and bitter and overwhelmingly sad, because in that moment of connection, she understood something about Hua Yan that no one else had ever understood. His rage was not evil. His destruction was not cruelty. Hua Yan, the fire fury, was not a monster. He was a prisoner who had finally broken free, and he was in agony. Mei Lin walked north alone into the Black Mountains. The sky above her was dark with smoke, and the ground beneath her feet was warm from the fires Hua Yan had left in his wake. She passed through forests that had been burned to black skeleton trees. She passed through villages reduced to ash and silence. She walked for a full day and a full night, without stopping, without eating, without sleeping, driven forward by the thread of connection in her chest, pulling her toward the fire fury. And on the morning of the second day, she found him. He was perched on the peak of the highest black mountain in the northern range, his enormous red body coiled around the summit like a crown of fire, his white-hot eyes scanning the horizon for Shenlong. The ground around the mountain was scorched black for miles in every direction. The air smelled of burning and ancient fury, and Mei Lin stood at the base of that mountain and looked up at him and did the bravest thing she had ever done in her 17 years of life. She called his name, Huyen. She called it out loud, in the silence of that burned and broken landscape. She called the name of the fire fury, and she waited. Huyen turned those white-hot eyes down toward the base of the mountain and found her, a tiny human girl standing alone in the ash. He stared at her for a long moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, and then he roared. The sound was beyond anything Mei Lin had ever experienced. It hit her like a wall of heat and pressure and sent her sliding backward across the ash-covered ground. But she did not run. She planted her feet, and she stood her ground, and she shouted up at him above the roar. "I know why you're angry." She shouted it as loud as her lungs would allow. "I know what was done to you. I know about the agreement, and I know it was not your choice." The roaring stopped. Sudden and complete silence fell across the black mountain like a hell breath. Huyen stared down at her, and for the first time in 3,000 years the fire fury was listening. Mei Lin told him everything she had understood through Shenlong's ancient eyes. She told him that the agreement that had bound him to the Black Mountains had not been made with his consent, that the first emperor had tricked him into sleeping, had used an ancient seal to keep him bound while the world moved on without him. She told him that his anger was justified, that his imprisonment had been wrong, that 3,000 years of rage burned inside him for a reason. And as she spoke, she felt the thread of connection between them growing stronger and warmer, and she saw something happening to Huyen that she had never expected to see. The white-hot fury in his eyes was cooling, slowly, the way a burning coal cools when the air around it finally stills. He lowered his great red head toward her, closer and closer until his eye was level with her face the same way Shenlong's had been in the valley. And she saw the same thing she had seen in Shenlong's ancient golden eye. Not fury, not destruction, pain, overwhelming ancient lonely pain. And beneath the pain something else, the desperate, exhausted longing to finally rest. Mei Lin reached up and placed her hand against the scales of Huyen's face. The heat was extraordinary, like pressing your hand against the surface of the sun. But Shenlong's breath was still in her bones and her blood, and it protected her. She felt Huyen's pain flowing into her through her palm, and she did not pull away. She absorbed it. All 3,000 years of rage and loneliness and imprisonment flowing through her small calloused hand and into her heart, and she held it there. And she spoke to him quietly now, no longer shouting, quietly, the way you speak to someone who is exhausted beyond all endurance. She told him it was over. She told him the imprisonment was over. She told him he was free, not free to destroy, not free to burn the world, but free to rest, finally and completely and permanently at rest. The most ancient dragon in the world closed his white-hot eyes. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the fire fury was still. What happened next, Mei Lin could never properly explain to anyone who asked her about it afterward. She felt Huyen's fire flowing out of him and into the mountain beneath them, felt it sinking down through the black rock deep into the earth where it belonged, the ancient fire returning to its source. She felt the rage dissolving like storm clouds after rain. She felt 3,000 years of pain releasing all at once like a held breath finally let go. And she felt Huyen himself changing. The massive red body around the mountain peak began to shimmer and shift and slowly dissolve in the light. Not the white-hot destructive light of his fury, but a warm, deep red golden light that rose up from the mountain into the dawn sky and spread across the horizon like a second sunrise. The most beautiful thing Mei Lin had ever seen in her life. And in the silence that followed after the light faded, she heard his voice for the first and only time. Not in her ears, in her heart. 2 words only. Thank you. And then he was gone. Mei Lin walked back south through the burned and broken landscape. But something was changing around her as she walked. where the ground had been scorched, black green shoots were beginning to push up through the ash. Where the forest had been reduced to skeleton trees, tiny leaves were unfurling on the blackened branches. Where the rivers had run dark and poison the water was clearing, turning crystal clean and blue as the sky above. Shenlong was healing. She could feel it through the connection in her chest. The great river was flowing strong again. The fish were returning. The birds were singing. The land was coming back to life. By the time she reached her village 2 days later, the first spring flowers were blooming in the ash-covered fields. And her father was standing at the village gate waiting for her. He had come back when the darkness lifted. When he saw her walking down the road alone, covered in ash with those extraordinary eyes, he fell to his knees and wept. And Mei Lin sat down beside him in the road and held his hands and let him cry until he had no tears left. They say that Shenlong healed completely over the following seasons, that the great river ran stronger and cleaner than it had in centuries, that the rains came exactly when they were needed and the floods stayed within their banks, and the fish were more plentiful than anyone could remember. They say that on certain nights, clear nights when the moon was full and bright, you could see Shenlong flying in great lazy circles above the river, his blue scales catching the moonlight, ancient and magnificent and free. And they say that every night, without fail, a young woman would climb to the top of the hill above her village and watch him fly. And sometimes, if the night was very clear and very still, Shenlong would dip one great wing toward the hill as he passed overhead. A gesture so small that most people would have missed it entirely. But Mei Lin never missed it. She was always watching. She was always there. The rice farmer's daughter who walked north when everyone else ran south, who stood at the base of a burning mountain and called the name of the fire fury out loud, who ended a 3,000-year war not with weapons or armies or power, but with understanding and compassion and a 17-year-old girl's unshakable courage. Her name was Mei Lin, and this has been her story, a story that has never been told. Until now. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below and tell me your favorite part. And if you're new here, please subscribe to Stories Never Told. Every single week, I bring you stories that will take your breath away. The legends, the forgotten souls, the extraordinary, ordinary people who changed the world. I will see you in the next one.